everyone, and welcome to Innosphere's Lunch and Learn. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Jim Sergi, who works closely with Innosphere since 2016 and is also a regulatory advisor to us. He's also hosted several of our clients at JP Morgan. Jim Sergi is the president and founder of CSSI Life Sciences, a company providing fully integrated, specialized regulatory and clinical services for pharmaceutical and medical device companies. Jim also served as a GP in Nova Capital. Prior to this role, Jim was the founder and managing partner of Bay Tower Capital, a life sciences merchant bank, and the co-founder and CEO of ProEd Communications, a healthcare services and drug development company. Jim has been responsible for over 85 NDA BLA approvals and over 250 medical device field approvals. His academic and medical experience includes Director of Experimental Therapeutics at the Cleveland Clinic Cancer Center, Associate Professor of Medical Surgical Nursing at the Case Western Reserve University, and Lecturer for Oncology at Cleveland State University. He's authored over 50 peer-reviewed publications and has numerous state-issued patents. Jim serves as a scientific reviewer for the NIH, SBIR, STTR Commercial Readiness Program, as well as a mentor to the NIH, NHL, BI, and the NIH Florida Feed Forward program. He also serves as a scientific advisor and board member to numerous nonprofits, private equity, and venture-backed investment firms, including Desktop Partners. Jim has an undergraduate degree in nursing from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania and a graduate degree from University of Akron and Cleveland State University. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege and honor to be back here on campus. What I'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about medical devices, some of our experience, some of the history, and some of the ways in which you can be more successful. I'll also talk about the elephant in the room, the FDA, and what we see, what we understand is happening both at the FDA as well as the NIH. So we'll get started. This is just a little bit about our company itself. You may be getting an announcement soon. We are rebranding the name of the company. Same company, same staff. It's going to be known as Qnova. And with Qnova Life Sciences, we're launching an Investor Readiness Accelerator starting May 1st. And we're also launching a fund, a venture fund, the 1st of June. So we're really excited about these new offerings. As indicated, we're a one-stop shop for regulatory services. We try to work globally. We have extensive experience in helping companies transition in, transition out of the US FDA. And with medical devices, we work, we're really agnostic with the types of devices we work on. We have a lot of experience with in vitro laboratory-based diagnostic tests, as well as software as a medical device. This slide here addresses some of the issues that we are seeing or you may have read about in the news with the FDA of late. There has been extensive staff cuts and reductions across all divisions of the FDA right now. Many of the individuals publicly that you may have heard about, some of these individuals have been offered positions back at the agency. It's unclear whether or not they will accept those positions and come back, or if they will accept the positions with other foreign countries where they're actively being recruited right now. What we are seeing is a significant brain drain. At times you go on the FDA website and it's dark. You don't get anything. Other times it's active, you make a phone call to your project manager, and the project manager is no longer there or has been reassigned to other areas. So that's been a real challenge. The other challenge that we've seen has just been with applications as we submit them since January. So what it's really forced us to do is to really educate the FDA with the application submissions that we send in. The FDA should never be viewed as your consultant. But it's also ever more important today when you submit applications that you really serve to educate them on the guidance to connect those dots for them so that you can help streamline your submission. I was sharing earlier this morning with a colleague, we recently submitted an orphan drug application. No issue, submit them all the time to the agency. Never been denied. The PDUFA date, or the PDUFA date, which is set at 70 days, is a date whereby the FDA needs to take action. PDUFA date was Friday a week ago. Never heard a word or a peep from the FDA before then. On that day, we got to the orphan approval, rubber stamped, 1 page, no comment. Client called, is this normal? No, never seen it before. So what we're seeing is that, the degree of review and clarity that they're providing has been really diminished, especially over the past 6 weeks. We're also seeing there's been significant cuts to the NIH. We've had a number of clients with SBIR grants that have been scored in the funding range. There's been no word. We have other clients who have SBIRs who haven't been paid. We do a lot of medical defense countermeasures for therapeutics as well as medical devices. We're on a month-to-month. These are high-priority products or programs within the DoD, and we're on a month-to-month with the funding, and we have to justify our budgets each month in order to get paid for the prior month's work. So we're seeing changes there. There's been talk that the FDA is going to change, possibly modify, or possibly do away with the MDUFA and PDUFA fees. So these are fees that as a medical device developer you pay to the agency, and these fees have been used to support and fund the FDA in order to expedite approval through the FDA. So if you're old enough to remember the day when there weren't MDUFA and PDUFA fees, you'd submit an NDA to the FDA and you waited, because they weren't obligated to review it within 180 days. We're also seeing proposed fewer guidances and regulations. One of the issues that we see is that so much of the FDA is congressionally mandated. So you have a pre-sub, you have a pre-IND meeting, FDA gives you guidance. You submit a SPA for your clinical study as a basis of approval. There's legal precedent being set with each sponsor, and it's unclear what power and what authority the government has to change those. So we're seeing a lot of lawsuits being mounted by law firms challenging the authority of Congress with the FDA. So I think you'll see some flux going on there. There's been talk that there may be less guidance, less oversight of the FDA. I'm not sure. The concern obviously is safety, which is the primary mandate of the FDA. We're also seeing the potential for more stringent guidances around vaccines. No surprise, right? What that translates to clinically is really unclear for vaccine test developers that are developing vaccines. One of the other pushes of the FDA with drug studies as well as medical device studies in the past 5 to 6 years has been to ensure that studies are well represented by ethnicity. And with the recent changes in the administration, we're not sure what implications that's going to have on the design and conduct of clinical studies to ensure that they're ethnocentric with the patient population. So it's something to really ask when you speak to the agency. And then we're also expecting delays in potential MDUFA and PDUFA dates. We have not seen it, but what we can tell you is we've not had an in-person meeting for a medical device product since before COVID. The only in-person meetings we have had with the agency have been with medical countermeasures with the DoD. Everything's been virtual. We expect that to continue. Whether they will continue to honor the MDUFA dates for a medical device for a pre-sub is approximately 70 days. 90 days for a 510K, 120 for a de novo. Whether they'll honor that or whether they'll play the clock game, where they'll send you back comments, the clock stops until you respond. So we'll see what happens. It's also, I think what's really important is you need to really assess the impact of the cost for your program. Because of the tariffs, we're seeing a lot of companies hit with increasing supply costs for critical supplies and also potentially impacting your vendor agreements or your supply agreements that you have with your vendors. So you're really going to have to look at that and monitor that as you move forward. Any questions on the elephant in the room? No?
Hey, Jim, maybe lab developed tests. You want to talk about the ruling on that?
Yes, so approximately, I think, what was it, 8 months ago, the FDA came out with a ruling indicating that they wanted to convert or transition companies that were developing laboratory-based diagnostics or CLIA-based tests over to traditional pathways. And they set a lot of guidelines in place for developing in vitro laboratory diagnostic tests that would, that you had to validate your test against the real truth. So it became a real challenge for a lot of test kit developers. What's happened recently is there's been a lot of lawsuits brought against the FDA, and that ruling has been put on hold as of last week. I think we're continuing to work with companies to develop laboratory-based tests that are CLIA-based, as well as long-term in vitro diagnostics. Yes?
Do we consider other regulatory authorities?
You know, in the past, Europe was always easier to go through for a medical device first because you worked with a notified body. The challenge with Europe, with the EMEA right now, is it's worse than we are with that process. Japan has 4 levels of classification. They have no timelines associated with the review process. So both Japan and Korea are much more stringent in their approval process. And Europe is just taking slow. Health Canada will not lead. Now, they'll say they'll lead, but they don't lead. They follow another competent health authority, such as the FDA or.
One of the things that we have noticed is that the gap between clinical devices and non-clinical devices, I guess you could call them health versus fitness, for example, is narrowing, and oftentimes on the other side, they're more capable than the ones on the clinical side. And so one of the questions that we've been pondering as these other devices become more and more capable, and you have doctors actually using the data from them, then how does that relate to what FDA's mandate is? And how do you see that becoming kind of entwined in the sense, for example, now they've got a new branch of medicine called longevity medicine. Look what they're doing. A lot of it's really cutting edge. A lot of the stuff they use hasn't been done through all the FDA approvals. And so there's a point where you almost end up with a parallel structure. Here's the clinical side, here's the other side. But when this side gets good enough, then, you know, like, what?
And I can't, you know, that's a difficult question. We're working with a number of companies right now that are using software AI as a medical device. So if you look at if you have a watch that is able to monitor your heart rate, your oxygen saturation, your EKG, you know, whatever, and if it has connectivity to your computer or to your physician's office, it is a Class 2 medical device. So, you know, it is regulated. What has happened with a number of companies, and we have worked with a number of these companies developing, you know, software, you know, as a medical device, initially as a wellness app. And so there's a lot of companies developing tools and instruments that you take through initially as a wellness app with making no medical claims with it, while you can currently go through the pathway for a regulated medical device. We have had clients come to us seeking remediation because they went down that pathway and they got a warning letter from the FDA. And oftentimes those warning letters are promulgated by your competitors. So it's just something to be aware of. And there's a lot of other, drugs, that people use for their skin, that it may, improve the appearance of fine lines. That's not a medical claim. But if you say you stimulate collagen or something, it becomes a medical claim and it's a drug. So there's a lot of ways in which people are kind of skirting the system. And how closely the FDA regulates that in the future is unknown.
So the changes that you have don't really shed light on.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So would you recommend putting in someone 513G, asking clearance, if you're making no medical claims?
I've been doing regulatory development for 30 years, and I have never once submitted a 513G. I think they pose more risk to companies than good, in my experience, just because you or your consultant, whoever you're working with, should know the pathway and what you want, how you want the FDA to regulate that. For the 513G, you're limited in what you can say and put in there, and it's the luck of the reviewer. We've had companies come to us where, with a medical device, they put it in, they say, no, you're a drug.
So last July, I put in the 513G.
Yeah.
I do make medical devices, but I also make wellness devices. So we took a medical device, we modified it, used the claims, we told the FDA what we were doing, we not heard anything.
Good. You haven't heard anything?
No.
Interesting.
Probably works.
Yeah, because normally with a 513G, you got a 30-day ADUFA date.
Perfect.
Yeah. You can follow up. Yeah, but,
Even if I want to.
yeah. Yes.
Most of my experience is doing with 510Ks with a real clear predicate device.
Yeah.
Looking now at taking a laboratory test and making a point of care. So there isn't a point of care predicate device. How would that still fall under a 510K, or using the laboratory device as a predicate?
Yeah, it can. There's ways to do that. One, you should consider having a pre-sub meeting with the FDA to define that. As a point of care, they'll want some human factor study or user studies associated with it. And those studies will need to be done before your clinical performance study is done. Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned about the uncertainty in the NIH. Along with that, have you heard anything about just the number of proposals that are going in? Is it up or down because of the uncertainty?
I can't comment on the number of proposals. I know last year the success rate for first-time submissions, SBIR1s, was around 6%. 6. Very low. Very low. So what we've seen has been an influx of funding through DoD channels. But, once again, with the SBIRs, we're expecting that there's going to be an alignment of SBIR funding with the current administration's goals and objectives. And a lot more discretion than, science peer review in the past. All right. So this slide just illustrates some comments about the FDA that I frequently get asked. The FDA has, and I hope and trust will always remain very transparent, whereby everybody plays by the same rules. The only goal of the FDA has been patient safety. That's the primary goal, of the FDA over the years. And keep in mind, the FDA is not your consultant. You never want to go to the FDA and say, well, gee, what do you think? What studies should we do? You're expected to go to the FDA with a well-thought-out plan for your analytic testing, your design testing, and really understand the pathway in which you should be regulated. And then it's up to the FDA to agree or disagree with you. and to provide you some guidance, but to never view them as a consultant. When you do get clarification back from the FDA in the form of a formal communication, if you don't understand, ask the agency. The biggest challenge we see from young companies is they'll get a document back from, a pre-submission meeting from the FDA, and they'll look at it and they'll say, well, that doesn't apply to me. Or they'll say they'll reference different codes. And if you don't really dig and peel the onion back with those codes, you can get caught. So it's really important that you really understand what the FDA is saying and what those requirements mean relative to your medical device. The regulatory pathways for a device are fairly, it can go down many different pathways. Unlike a drug, which is highly prescriptive, with the device you have 3 classes. And within those classes, you have different pathways you can go down. So it's really important as a device developer, you understand those pathways. And the timing has been predictable. We're hoping it remains predictable, but the FDA has well-defined timelines for review of medical device applications, and we'll talk about that. The MDUFA and PDUFA dates have been mandated by Congress, and the funding is set annually by Congress for device manufacturers. They do have small business enterprise exemptions, so if you're a small business, which I believe most of you will qualify for, you need to apply for your SBE designation within the year in which you intend to submit your approval. That's important because right now we're seeing a 2 to 3 month approval for your SBE application with the FDA. So keep that in mind. You need to have that in place before you file your, say, 510K application in order to benefit from the reduced fees. There's also for medical devices special designations that are available, such as breakthrough. So when we have a medical device company come to us, one of the things that we always like to do is to develop a strategic roadmap. And that strategic roadmap begins at the end. What do you want to be when you grow up? And then how can we reverse engineer that device or those claims to meet your commercial goals and objectives? And so we always start at the end, and we really want to understand what are your goals, what are your objectives? Is your goal to build and sell? And if so, at what stage? Because that has implications on your development plan. Do you need to have a fully baked QMS? When are you going to do your manufacturing transfer, or are you going to continue to build out a manufacturing program? Also, what are your desired product attributes, and how can you differentiate? If you're going to develop a medical device as another Me Too or as a 510K that we'll talk about shortly, that means you're no better than and no different than that predicate, but you're not worse than. All right? So you're just another Me Too, even though you may be prettier, maybe shinier, smarter than that other device. In the eyes of the FDA, you're identical. So how can you differentiate your product? You can differentiate your product by publications, by additional studies, that really look at the marketing attributes of your product to help differentiate it. And then how can you create shareholder value? You can do that through your IP, through market research, through your clinical study, and really working with your KOL to get market traction with your product. And it's also important to really understand your stakeholders. What we try to do with our companies is when we're developing a medical device, we try to encourage them to build it with a strategic partner in mind. If you're developing, I spoke last night with a company that has developed robotic-assisted surgery, laser surgery, for bone surgery, to replace, for hip and knee replacement surgery. So who is their ultimate customer going to be? And what does J&J, DePuy, what does Zimmer, or what does Stryker want to see from that data? And how will that integrate in? And then how can we, as we're doing the studies, begin to integrate that thinking in and begin to engage with KOLs to understand what is it that those strategics want to see. And then where will your product be marketed? You know, if we're a global economy now. So as you do your design analytic studies, even your sterilization testing plans or your ship testing, think about the requirements that other countries may have. You know, other countries use different types of sterilization than what we use in the U.S. So as you're developing your technology and you're going through your testing protocols, try to harmonize those testing protocols early so you don't have to go back later and do bridging studies, which are more expensive and is going to cost time and may limit strategic interest, because the strategics want to really understand, you know, how does it harmonize to the EU? How does it harmonize to Asia? You know, the markets. Any questions? Robbie's going to make the slides available to everyone afterwards, okay? So the medical devices in the U.S., and this slide just illustrates it, how they define it is it's any device is an instrument, machine that does not achieve its primary intended purpose through a chemical or biologic mechanism of action and is not systemically absorbed. So that's the critical distinction between a device versus, you know, a drug. And it's regulated by CDRH, also known as the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health. Our device system, or CDRH, regulates the medical device based on 3 classifications based on risk, and it's known as Class 1, 2, or 3. As the numbers go up, the risk to the patient or to the caregiver increases. So it's really important to really understand how your device is going to be regulated. And this slide just further illustrates Class 1 are relatively easy. Most Class 1 devices you can register yourself. An example could be a bedpan, an IV pole, you know. But Class 2 device typically has special controls associated with them, and it requires pre-market authorization or notification by the FDA. The FDA earlier this year had planned to reclassify approximately 75 different classes of medical device as exempt 510Ks. There's been no action taken on that list to date. So it's important for you to keep informed and understand if and when those exemptions will take place. Within the Class 2 hierarchy, there's another category known as de novo. A de novo category is a category for which there is not a predicate or a medical device that is substantially equivalent to your medical device. And that is regarded as a de novo. Most 510Ks never require clinical testing. In fact, fewer than 15% of Class 2 devices require clinical testing. Even some de novos do not require clinical testing. So it's really important, if you are a de novo, that you get clarification and approval from the FDA that you will be regulated as a de novo. And then Class 3 devices require pre-market approval, and I often describe a PMA or a Class 3 device similar to a drug that only requires one pivotal study. So this illustrates, this describes a Class 1 device. They're low to moderate risk. An example could be a thermometer, an IV pole, even some mass specometers are Class 1 devices. If your thermometer, you know, is a watch, and it connects to the internet or has any connectivity, you are subjected to the new FDA cybersecurity rules and regulations. So keep that in mind. Class 2 devices, moderate risk. It's important for you to identify your predicate. In our experience, when companies come to us and say, we're a Class 2 device, here's my predicate, we often find a better predicate or a different predicate. So it's important when you look at a predicate, you look just not quickly at the predicate, but pull the 510K file. They'll be redacted, pull the files, look at the testing, look at the requirements, that they had to go through, because you're gonna have to match that. And then you want to align that with the reimbursement codes, because each predicate is gonna have a different reimbursement code. And you wanna try to align yourself with that code that's gonna give you the highest rate of reimbursement. Even though you're a predicate and a 510K, that does not equate to reimbursement from payers. You will still have to work with payers to get reimbursement, and that process should begin concurrent with your 510K process.
Question?
Yeah.
Can you apply for a 510K and be looking to get new reimbursement codes, or are they?
You can, it's difficult, to get a new reimbursement code can take 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
It's gonna cost you a lot, typically the budget that I see from, groups that do reimbursement codes is $3+ million,
Mm-hmm.
Very expensive.
Yeah, thank you.
And once again, with the testing, you're required to demonstrate that you are substantially equivalent to and not inferior to the predicate in which you are basing your 510K on. Human factor testing may be necessary. It's really dependent on the predicate. And the FDA's MDUFA date is 90 days. So when you submit your application, within 10 business days, you'll receive notification back from the FDA that they're accepting it for review, and then they have 90 business days to take action on your application. If you receive comments back from the agency within that time period, the clock stops. So it's important that you begin to think about, what is it that they're likely to ask? Where are their potential gaps so that you can be ready to respond? In the past, we used to submit 510K applications with incomplete data. We were maybe missing a ship test or missing a biocomp test, but we knew we were going to have that test in within 30 days, and we wanted to get the application in. What we're finding out now is that the FDA is reviewing the applications. They want to make sure everything is there, and if it's not there, they're kicking it back. This slide just illustrates what a de novo is. It's where a predicate does not exist. Oftentimes with a de novo, you're going to want to have a pre-submission with the FDA to get agreement that the FDA agrees that it is a de novo, and you're going to want to define with the agency what special controls will be applicable and what clinical testing may or may not be applicable for your de novo application. With a de novo, one of the benefits is that you're the first. You're the first. So what we saw with all the COVID test kits, there was a lot of, people were playing chicken with the COVID test kits because they were all waiting to see who was going to be first, to go through as a de novo. Because once you went through as a de novo, everybody was lined up. We had 7 applications lined up, ready to submit as soon as the FDA approved that first de novo, because it's easier and it's substantially cheaper. This illustrates a class 3. It's high-risk devices. Think of, a cardiac implant device, stents, IVDs that are being developed for cancer or certain infectious diseases such as HIV are automatically class 3 medical devices. With it, you're required to have an IDE. You can sometimes seek and obtain an exemption on your IDE. You're also required to have a quality system in place. Unlike a class 2 device, you're only required to have a quality system in place at the time of market sales or commercialization. With a class 3, you need to have it in place a priori. And if the package is very similar to a drug package. There's all sorts of device-drug combination products out there. What's critical is if you're developing a device-drug combination, an example could be a Foley catheter that is coated with a product that would prevent biofilm formation. Is it a drug? Is it a device? I would argue that it's a device regulated by CDRH. So it's really important to determine early on which agency is going to have jurisdiction. Whenever possible, you want to lean towards CVRH because it's a whole lot easier. As a device drug combination, the other thing you can submit is what's known as a device master file. So once a CVRH reviews and approves your device, you can then provide a right to reference to other sponsors or other manufacturers to just have access to your device file. So you don't have to go back through each time through the FDA. The FDA has recently published, and they continue to update the guidances for software as a medical device. And so it's really important that you understand and you keep abreast of this. Basically, anything that connects to the internet is considered software and falls under the cybersecurity guidelines with the FDA. And these guidelines are very strict. They're changing, and it's something for groups to really understand and how to navigate that. There's a lot of third parties that our clients contract to provide the cybersecurity software that is required. You know, with the FDA, one of the, up until recently, we would always encourage clients to have a pre-submission meeting with the FDA. We have clients say, well, I called and spoke to the FDA. Well, what did you do? Well, I picked up the phone and I called 1-800-FDA. I said, that's great, it doesn't count. Probably talk to an entry-level person who doesn't know buzzcuts about your product. So what's important is any communication you have with the FDA needs to be done in a formal channel. And with a medical device, it's done through what is known as a pre-submission meeting or a Q-sub meeting. It's where you put in a formal meeting request with a briefing package. Unlike a drug, your briefing package goes in with your submission. It's submitted through the eStar portal, and you would request, provide the FDA with a structure of your meeting, the questions you want to ask, the data to support those questions that you want of the agency. The agency has 70 days, approximately 70 days to respond. Meetings, you're able to request a meeting as written feedback only. You can do a virtual meeting. You can put an in-person meeting, which isn't going to be granted right now. But you'll receive very detailed information back when you do that. When you go to the FDA's website, they'll have a nice little template for you to follow along for your meeting request. You want to provide a cover letter, identify your questions that you want to ask of the agency. For instance, does the agency agree that my product should be regulated as a Class 2, 510K using this product as its predicate? And then you will list the product code, the K number. You'll then provide a substantial equivalent chart, that has the client's, substantial equivalent chart that you were able to obtain from the FDA's, filing, and then you'll align your data with it. If you don't have the data, you'll identify the protocol that you're going to use to obtain that data. You're limited to the number of questions that can be asked. Typically, it's 10 questions, plus or minus. You can have sub-questions under there. But you always want to ask the question in a way that you're going to get the result back that you hope to achieve, back from them. And you provide the data and your justification with prior guidances, how the FDA's ruled before, or FDA law, or your test protocols that you want to use to develop your analytic methods. You want to identify who's going to be attending from your group. If you're going to go to the FDA with a biostatistician, with a lawyer, the FDA is going to have a lawyer and a biostatistician at your meeting. You need to think about who you want present, at your meeting. You want to look at what's been done before. How is the FDA ruled? What's the latest guidances? And just because you don't believe there's anything, there's no other 510Ks, doesn't mean the FDA hasn't seen it. So you really need to be sleuthy and do your work and research to really understand, are there guidances? Have there been draft guidances drafted? What's the latest FDA thinking around your product? You also want to submit a clean application. Spell check, grammar check, your application. Make sure you have all of the attachments in the format that the agency wants. They want to see the line data, so make sure the tables and listings are structured in a manner that you can then provide the line data. So if they need to go back and do analysis, they're able to do it, and they will. You want to review for inconsistencies. This is a big bugaboo that we find when we meet with companies. Are the inconsistencies in what they're asking or what they're saying. And then your meeting package and information, if you get requests back from the FDA, don't be late, because the clock is ticking, and if you don't respond timely, they can kick your application out and have you resubmit. And then when you have your meeting with the FDA, you get 60 minutes with the agency. The virtual meetings that we have had have been really rich. There's been a lot of participation. They're over Zoom. You're not permitted to record the meeting minutes, although recently we've had a couple meetings with the FDA, with the different branches, where they have AI note taker going. Historically, we've not been allowed to record the meetings. So you take copious notes, you record, in your mind, what's taking place, because you are required to provide the FDA with the official meeting notes or meeting minutes within 10 days after your meeting.
Jim,
Yes.
would you recommend running that document through an AI system or checking over consistency?
You can. We've used AI. A lot of people are saying, "Gee, well, AI writes your 510K, writes your breakthrough designation," and I don't believe that's the case, because it's just not a scientific review. It's really pulling in legal, regulatory literature. We run it through, whenever we write the applications, we're running it through different software systems that we have, spell check, grammar check. We want to verify the references, because you're required to provide PDFs of your references. You want to go back and, you want to make sure that the data you're citing from a reference is accurate in your reference, and attach those PDFs. That's a big thing that the FDA will get hung up on. This slide just illustrates the typical stages of development for a medical device and the relative timeline. So I mentioned the small business entity that the FDA has. This is a program that the FDA has for small business enterprises, where you have substantially lower fees for your medical device application. And this slide illustrates some of the parameters that the FDA uses to base a small business enterprise on. And it's illustrated in this slide. The fees go up a little bit each year. What we see is probably a 5% increase annually. The fees are, the registration as an SBE is due each year, so you have to reapply each year for this. But you can see there are substantial benefits for applying to the FDA as a small business enterprise. The timing for it used to be a couple weeks. Now we're seeing months, go by, and we haven't, and clients haven't gotten them. We're having delay submission of the application because the fees are due when you submit. Yes.
Just to clarify, are those numbers close for 510K? Why would the 66 be greater than the
It's a typo. It should be reversed.
reverse? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, thank you.
Sorry, I'll correct that. But you can see the benefit.
Yeah.
And it's a simple application. You got to provide your basic information on your corporate entity, and your tax balance. One of the things that we see often, and I'm dealing with this with two clients right now, is one on the drug, one on the device side, is whenever you submit your first, or you have your first formal interaction with the FDA in the form of a pre-sub, the FDA is going to assign a project manager to you. That project manager is going to go to your website. They're going to look at your website. And if you have any medical claims on your website or anything about your product that isn't kosher with the agency, meaning it's making a medical claim that has not been substantiated by the FDA, we or you will receive, we'll typically get a call advising us, hey, we looked at your client's website. You may want to advise them to clean it up, otherwise, you'll get a warning letter. So you don't want to go into a pre-sub, you don't want to have that, hanging over you. So what we always do is, we have somebody in the office want to, work with the client, go through and scrub your website, before you have that first interaction, with the agency. This slide just looks at, when you are approved as a Class 1 device, Class 2, Class 3, you are required to register with the FDA. You're required to register you as the manufacturer at the FDA, and there is a fee associated with that. The fee for 2025 is illustrated here. That's an annual fee that is due, and I believe it's due in October. So, you need to play the game, if you're expecting approval in September, you register, pay the $9,000, and you're going to need to repay in another month, or do you wait? So you need to be cognizant that that is an annual fee, and then you're required to register your product at the FDA's website. You can have as many products registered as you want. And this just illustrates with your QMS, you are required to maintain design files. It's almost impossible to create design files post hoc. So we always want to encourage clients to, develop your QMS, develop your design history files, your vendor qualification protocol early on. We follow 21 CFR Part 720. The rest of the world follows ISO 13485. There's been talk this past year before the current administration that we were going to harmonize, and they actually set a date for harmonization of the systems. But that's been put on hold. So we're not sure if that's going to come back or not. And it's just created all sorts of challenges, not only with device companies, but especially with drug developers. The quality system really provides your document management system, whether it's paper, whether it's electronic. We're really maintaining all of your controls on inputs, outputs, et cetera. And it's really critical that you begin to develop your QMS early in your cycle. So with that, I'll stop. Happy to answer any questions. We host annually a program at JP Morgan. We've been a partner with the Inosphere for, about 10 years. We've been a partner with the Inosphere, and we've hosted a conference at JP Morgan. If you're not familiar with it, it is the world's largest investor conference for life science companies. Last year it brought in over 150,000 people to San Francisco. So it's a big event. So all the strategics are there, all the investors are there, and it's really comprised of around 30 conferences. It's just under the big top of JP Morgan. I've hosted a circus act in the ballroom of the Hilton for the past 11 years, and we'll be doing it again this year. We encourage and invite everyone to attend. It's free for you to register and to participate. We have a discounted block of rooms at the Marriott. The hotel rooms can be quite high. But if you reach out to me on our website, we can provide you all the information. Ben Walker from the Inosphere has attended the program, as have a number of you over the years. So it's a great program, to really meet people, meet investors. We had 1,500 people participate last year in our program. So it's a big event.
And where is it?
It's in San Francisco. Our program's at the Hilton in San Francisco, where everything kind of takes place.
So Jake, go through Innova,
Yeah.
done the pre-sale, got the program manager, program manager is no longer there. Got an STTR application, phase 1, phase 2 fast track in,
Yeah,
not knowing what's going on, making the decision, rather than wait for all of this to unfold, go down the investor route, provide funding to do clinical trial, do it internationally, for cheap. And I'm hearing that trend now. A lot of people, that I talk to, are supportive of that.
yeah,
In all of our study research previously, we've used Penn State. And then when you start talking to researchers in, for example, Australia, it's almost half the price.
yeah,
It's incredible.
yeah,
So I know
yeah,
a big shift.
yep,
Now, here's my concern. I may be going off and doing a study in Australia, but I don't even know if I'm going to get the opportunity to talk to the FDA about the study and the design controls because of their delay. I'm going to wait. I'm just going to do it.
yeah. So, great question. I would not start the study until you get clarity from the FDA on your protocol before you start anything. A lot of our clients, come to us saying, should I go to Australia for whether it's drug or whether it's device? Okay. I had lunch yesterday with a lady that's CEO of a company called BioIntellect, CRO in Australia, great group. And we do a lot of work with Mobius, which is a medical device CRO in Australia. Australia has a tax program where you can, once you set up, and it's changed a lot, significantly, and so it's really not the 43 or 48% that was being offered. It's that gap in delta is now down to about 13%. So if you set up a registration, a domicile in Australia with an approved agent, so you got to have an in-country agent, and there's groups such as Klein, Premier, that will serve as in-country agent and do your accounting, your banking, and set all that up. You are eligible for tax credits and money back on your research program, and it used to be extremely attractive. The challenge recently in Australia, and we see this, is it's a population of 25 million. A number of large strategics have gone into Australia, and I've been to Australia many times in the past 2 years, lecturing at universities, and these universities have strategic partnerships with the institution for preferential patient access. So it all comes down to patient recruitment, and patient recruitment means time, which means money. So that's been the biggest challenge that we've seen in Australia, and we've never seen it pencil out on paper. If you're looking you can do medical device studies anywhere you want. What you need to do is you need to get confirmation back from the agency over how many U.S. subjects they want to see in your device study. So if you're doing a study in your population, for instance, we have a device right now we're working on. It's robotic AI-assisted surgery, okay? And the lead indication is liver cancer. And the question to the agency is, will the agency accept, foreign clinical data? And what we did is we set, from 2 sites that are foreign. With 1 site in the U.S., we knew they were going to want at least 1 site, but could the majority of the subjects come from non-U.S. sites? The agency, because you want to ask that question, because the agency has gone on record recently as saying they will no longer accept all foreign data. So that would be the question you ask. How much will they? And you want to say, will they accept? If you need 2 sites, will they accept the majority? And you define the majority. As long as the study is done under ICH GCP, That's really what the agency's looking for. But, we've been looking at Taiwan, has done a really good site. Malaysia, does really good work. South Africa is coming into the fold, Brazil, Mexico. There's a number of really good centers where you can go that are cheaper, far cheaper than Australia. And you don't have to worry about all the tax credits, Yeah, yeah. I would talk to some groups. But before you do the study, you gotta get confirmation from the FDA on what they will accept.
When we got involved with, some of medical devices, one of the issues that we were looking at is, well, how do patients relate to it? Eventually, as you, so everybody knows over here, the large language models kicked out. All of a sudden, patients could access these things directly. So we started working with companies and looking at how can you make these things work. One of the things that we noticed was that if you know how to do it properly, and we had to really run a lot of experiments to figure out how to do this well, these systems can provide an enormous amount of information, diagnostically speaking, about our patient, submitted with the right physiological data, and so on and so forth. So one of the things I'm curious about is, how does the FDA see it? Because if you're a doctor and you're accessing ChatGPT and you're providing data and you're getting something back, it is a...
If you're making a diagnosis, if you're monitoring, or if you're making a diagnosis or a clinical, claim, your device. We just did a device with, MD Anderson. They have, software, uses AI, and with AI software, you got your training set and your clinical validation set, and they are requiring 3 geographically distinct locations for your clinical validation protocols for your AI. We worked with MD Anderson. They said, well, we're MD Anderson. We did it. They have satellites all over Texas, elsewhere. They said, does that count? The FDA said no. 3 distinct sites, not all MD Anderson. And what we did with this software was, because it does interpret a radiographic image. We took it through not as a clinical diagnostic tool, but as a radiographic management tool. So it's just a management tool, even though it will circle, highlight, draw your attention, to the focal lesion and suggest. Still, we were able to get it entered in as a management tool. So with software, if you're monitoring, if you're diagnosing, making a medical claim, it's a device.
So is it when the device is doing the diagnosing, or is there a distinction, I guess is what I'm trying to say, when you use the software that is informing the physician is making the diagnosis, not not the software. Is there a distinction there?
Yeah.
So in that case, the software is just...
The software.
It's the software. But the responsibility and the call, from a diagnostic point of view...
Is up to the
Is
physician.
the physician.
Yeah.
And that's dividing.
Yeah. It's a fuzzy line.
It's a very fuzzy.
It's so fuzzy right now, and that's why we have a lot of clients going down, I call it the wellness path.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Glucometers, class 2 device.
So what we've noticed is, I think that I'm always volunteer to be a guinea pig when I hang some stuff on me. Boy, I love looking at data anyways. And but one of the things you learn is what you look like when you're healthy, and how things change when you're not. And it's always interesting to go to your doctor, and I've done this, and they always laugh at me because you're a very interesting patient. Because I said, this is where I was, this is where I am, I want to get back to that.
Yeah.
And it's quantifiable. But again, it's that interaction, I'm going there as a patient.
Yeah. It's
really interesting.
Yeah. The prior administration was really interested in connectivity devices that would monitor patients' health and wellness in the home. Where that goes under the current administration, I don't know. It came out of Japan a number of years ago where they had a big initiative to launch what's known as the Healthy City Initiative, where patients use devices in their home, you know, to monitor their health, and these devices are connected to the health network. So they get reminders, tips, and a lot of things. They've been able to demonstrate a reduction in healthcare costs in Japan. So the U.S. really has tried kind of develop a similar model, and there are companies that have developed some of these tools and technologies to do that. And we've had discussions with the agency around those. But what the future holds from a regulated perspective, I don't know.
Well, UE, the Chinese company, has a SpO2 monitor.
Yeah.
And if your SpO2 levels drop and your heart rate is doing certain things, it wakes you up.
Yeah.
So it's actually intervening in it, wake up, breathe. I don't know how they regulate that. It's an interesting. Anyway.
This is really interesting. Thank you so much. So we have a device that we're planning to use for our phase 3 trial, and we want to get it cleared beforehand. But our ultimate therapy really depends on the drugs. We're doing a phase 2 trial for that right now. So my question is it the right strategy to be trying to pursue the 510K and the phase 2 in parallel, and then try to bring them together for the phase 3, or is there another route we should be considering?
You know, if you can take your device through initially as a 510K, it's always preferable if it's a device drug delivery system.
It's not, it's a combination therapy, so we can cure a form of hearing loss by basically giving a sound stimulus as well as a drug, but it only works when you get both the sound and the drug.
You go through as a combination.
So is that different than from the phase 3 trial? Like, would we not need to do that?
Wait, who's regulating? Are you being regulated as a drug or as a device?
This is one of the questions. The FDA is really not sure with us. So they've kind of given us, conflicting information in the past, and at this point, we're pursuing the phase 2, because that was kind of where we left it, but we still ultimately want to have this device as the main part of our product offering.
Yeah, that's gonna, if you can take it through as a PMA, it's one clinical and it's a whole lot cheaper. Less reimbursement, so you got a pluses and minuses right off there. I need more information, but from what you've described, it would be regulated as a combination device and would be able to necessarily decouple it until you're approved, and then once you're approved, you could have a device master plan. You may want to administer whether it's an antibiotic or a steroid.
Happy to talk later.
Yeah. Any other questions? Feel free to reach out, anytime. We're here. We've been working out here for a long time, and we're really pleased to be part of the ecosystem here. So thank you.